So
I can read this print, but I can't read the phone book.
treasure is.
It's too small.
All I have to do is go like this, and oh, there it
I need a
is.
magnifying glass.
How small can we make it?
Yeah, I
Oh
did
my
Green
gosh.
Lakes for 5 years.
How
What's
few
that?
pages can we print?
Yeah.
The set,
Yeah, there's no way I can read a phone book.
That was fun.
All right,
Oh,
30
yeah.
seconds. Everyone.
and that's where they set.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners meeting. This is an equalization meeting that's required by state statute. Today is Tuesday, April 10th, 2012, and it is exactly 2 p.m. We are in the County Commission chambers, located at 400 Boardman, Traverse City, Michigan. We will call this meeting to order, and we will start with the pledge, please, if we can stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll have the clerk do the roll call, please.
Okay, Commissioner Wheelock, Commissioner Fleece, Commissioner Maxbauer,
Here.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yep.
Commissioner Richardson,
Here.
Commissioner Lemkool,
Here.
Commissioner Henschel,
Yes.
Commissioner Gilman, and Chairman Newman.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum of the board. And if commissioners happen to come in after the roll call, if you can time their arrival on the minutes, we'd appreciate that.
We need two more of these.
You need two more of these? Take mine for now. We'll get a copy later.
Thick things. That's okay.
I'm good. I've read it.
Oh, all right.
All right.
All right, okay.
Back it goes.
Okay, so we've completed the pledge and the roll call. We now go to the first public comment. Not seeing any members of the public here. Does any member of the public wish to speak, other than staff? Then we will dispense from the reading of the rules of the first public comment, and we will move on to the equalization report. Bob Vandermark, if you could get yourself introduced and your colleague, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, ladies.
You might want to move the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth, so that you're speaking.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen, ladies, commissioners. I have with me here, by the way, my interim deputy director, Kristen Steger. I brought her here this afternoon because she really has been instrumental in putting together this report. And I just thought people might like to meet Kristen, so.
Thank you.
She's done a very good job, and I've truly appreciated it. Herewith is the 2012 equalization recommendations for Grand Traverse County. In every township and city, I am recommending that the county equalized value be the same as the assessed value as finalized by the local assessor and the local board's review. Every assessing unit brought their assessment levels in between 49 and 50%. And that's pretty tricky, by the way, because that's a very narrow range. And we don't know going in for sure what boards of review are going to do, and assessors have to report the changes to us. There's 66 separately equalized classes in Grand Traverse County, so it's not just 13 townships and cities for equalization purposes. There's 66 separate studies and 66 separate equalizations that have to be done, because the state of Michigan adopted a statute called equalization by class a number of years ago, and we have to do 66 separate studies instead of just one for each of the 5 classes in the county in order to meet that requirement. I'm going to get where I'm at. Okay, every assessing unit brought in their assessment levels between 49 and 50% of the levels determined by County Equalization Department study of the assessment levels. Now, they get that study early in the year. We try to get it to them as early as possible so that they have a chance to question it, challenge it, make changes in it, and those things happen. It's a give and take process. That's the requirement for an equalization factor of 1.0. You got to be between 49 and 50. Assessors have had an opportunity to question the county equalization study. They've all reported their final totals and changes to the county equalization department. The reporting and give and take discussion has been excellent. I believe I've talked to every assessor in the county as they brought in their data and we talked about the results. It has been great. Kristen's talked to them too. It's been great to work with every one of them, and they are. I really like working with the assessors in the county. I know most of them from the past, so it's kind of nice to work with them. Taxable values have declined by 0.286% in 2012. Right? We hate to see declines when we're looking at the impact on our tax base, but that's not too bad. Last year values declined by 2.13%. So this is a substantial improvement over the past. A decline in taxable value of real property has been offset by a 1.19% increase in a taxable value of personal property. A large amount of the property in the personal property class is what most of us would consider to be real property. That's something often very misunderstood. For example, easements, rights-of-way, pipelines buried in the ground, usually owned by utilities, but not always. Power poles and lines are treated as personal property. Personal property also includes leasehold improvements, such as wiring, plumbing, heating, cooling, and wall partitions, ceilings, etc. This can be 1/2 the cost in many shopping centers and commercial buildings. They're basically real property in nature, but because they're leasehold improvements, we're required to treat them as personal property for equalization purposes. Buildings improvements on leased land are another example. All the remote signs that you've seen, even though they're set on foundations and sometimes 20, 30 feet in the ground underneath, those are personal property. An increase in the value of personal property is a good economic sign, and that's true. It means that investments are being made in equipment. It also means that personal property reporting to assessors is improving. I am concerned that real property values are still declining. If personal property values and reporting do not continue to improve in future years, and that's unpredictable, by the way, we may not be able to keep our tax base from declining in future years. And there are some signs in there. I'm going to point them out to everybody here. We may not be able to keep up the good news that we have today in the future. And we just need to know that you folks have to make difficult management decisions, and so does Mr. Bott. And I will try to do some analysis later on that may give you some better predictive ability for what you might face in the future in terms of budgets and tax base and all that. Personal property program. Next year, we plan to work with assessors to do two things. Discovery of omitted or unreported personal property will be a joint effort with the assessors. And I've talked to every one of them about this, and they want to do it this way. Some have made good efforts to locate personal property accounts. Any discoveries that we make will be reported to them. Most do not have the ability to identify leasing companies that have property in many locations throughout the county. It's not unusual, by the way, for leased equipment to constitute 20 or 25% of the accounts in many jurisdictions. I have no idea what that percentage may be in Grand Traverse County, but it's a significant item. They're very hard to find because you can't find them by driving down the street or even walking the street. Sometimes you can locate them that way. But there are ways to do that, and we're going to help the assessors do that and work with them on that. Most assessors will appreciate any information that will help them, and we sure plan on seeing that they have that. I really plan, and Kristen and all of us plan on having a good joint effort with the assessors on addressing all these kinds of issues. We do have to equalize personal property the same way that we equalize real property. This means we have to do some auditing of personal property filings by taxpayers. I plan, or I should say we plan, to ask the assessors to select accounts that they feel should be audited. They are probably the best judge of which accounts might need an audit. We also must select some for audit on our own in order to do a valid study of assessment levels for equalization purposes. By the way, when we do that, the assessors are going to know right away which ones we're looking at and all that kind of stuff. There's not going to be any surprises. The results will be shared with the assessors before they have to set their assessments, and that's really critical, so that the assessor has a chance to recognize change or make judgment on whatever might be discovered before it's finalized. Assessors meeting. We have a meeting scheduled with assessors early in May. We will explain how we plan to work with them next year, and it won't just be on the personal property program, it's also going to be on the equalization samples for industrial, commercial, residential, and all that. So we want them to know what we're doing ahead of time and really ask for their help about areas that might need attention. We also want to know what we can do to help them and work with them. They have worked well with us this year, and they really have. Any commissioner, by the way, is invited to attend that meeting. You might find it informative to hear the discussion, and it's a wide open process, and any of you fine gentlemen and ladies are welcome to attend. I don't know the specific date. I think it's on the first Wednesday.
May 3rd.
May 3rd, is it?
I believe.
Yeah, I think and it'll be here in the county building in one of the meeting rooms. So it should be easy. You might just find it helpful to attend. Michigan Tax Tribunal Appeals, and this is an area that I'm really concerned about for the county and for the cities, townships, and schools. Many tribunal cases, and taxpayers for that matter, many tribunal cases are being settled because the township or city cannot afford to defend the case. Large tribunal cases require a full 3 approaches to value appraisal. That's an income approach, cost approach, and market approach. They also require legal representation and fact-finding by the assessing unit. And often auditing financial records and personal property is needed. Because one of the disputes is which part of this appraisal is real property and which part is personal, and you need to make sure you're not double assessing things or, frankly, double equalizing them. So often you have to sit down with the taxpayer and say, okay, what are you reporting? And here's what we have in our appraisal, so that we're not at odds with each other and, frankly, sometimes double assessing property. This is too expensive for most units of government. It can easily cost $50,000 to $100,000 to do this on a tribunal case. The township share of the tax levy is typically about 5% of the taxes in question. A township may get as little as $2,500 out of a $50,000 tax bill. That's 5% of the $50,000 bill, and that's pretty typical. Even if they win the appeal, the township, they can never recover the cost involved in defending one of these things correctly. And I wish that weren't true, but I just need to share that with you folks and the finance people. Townships and even the city are at a great disadvantage when these large appeals occur. The county is at the mercy of whatever comes out of this. It is our plan to develop rental information, sales information, and provide any help we can to the units of government and the assessors to deal with this problem. In the process of doing our commercial and industrial studies and preparing the analysis that we have to do for equalization, we will have information that will be helpful to them that they might use in defense of their appeals or in defense of finding a correct and fair assessment for the taxpayer. A joint participation in some of the appeals by the county and other taxing units should be considered, and that's really up to you folks and the administrator and the finance people and all that kind of stuff. But one thing I can tell you for sure, townships cannot afford to defend large tribunal cases based on what the state is requiring at the tax tribunal level to defend a case. I wish it weren't true, but we might as well face it. Fairness to the rest of the taxpayers is also an issue. Just because you can settle with one doesn't mean the others may not be entitled to the same or similar treatment or be shortchanged because of the decision that was made. Unawarded reductions often result in higher taxes for the remaining taxpayers, and that's often not understood, but that's a mathematical reality. It's not I always say it's not a philosophical discussion, it's an arithmetic problem. If you have, I'll just take a specific example. If your tax base, if you're levying 10 mils for police protection, could be anything, could be your library, could be any part of your budget. If you decide that one part of your town or one large taxpayer is somehow going to be assessed a lot lower, now suppose the reduction is on, say, a quarter of the community. And say you cut it in half, and you like this taxpayer, you're not trying to pick on him, but when you get done, what you'll find is suppose you're levying 10 mils for police protection, and it's raising, say, $1 million. Before you made that cut, the 1/4 of the community that got the reduction, before that, they were paying 1/4 of the cost of that $1 million, $250,000. If you cut that in half, when you get done, the remaining 3/4 of the community are going to be paying, instead of half, pardon me, the other half of the community will end up, instead of paying half of the cost of that $1 million, they're going to pay $666,000 of that cost. And the reduction that, and maybe very justifiably, that was given to that one taxpayer is going to cause, when budget time comes, the layoff of police officers, renegotiating a union contract, or deciding to take the money out of the fire department, the library, or some other thing in your budget. And they're very tough decisions. So it's really important that we be pretty sure that we've got fair values on these large cases, and on any of them, really. Doesn't make a difference how big the taxpayer is. And that's an issue that I've talked to Dean Bott about, and we're going to be trying to do what we can in our department to help assessors handle that and provide the information so that they can handle it. It's not the county's direct responsibility to defend assessments. It's the townships and cities that have to do that. But unfortunately, they have the smallest economic interest in how the case is handled. Just for example, the county share of the tax levy is roughly 16%. The township share is 5% or less. So we're a bigger party of interest, but we don't have control over what they're doing. But we can try to help them do a better, fairer job, and that's where I'm headed. Now let's take a look at the report itself. Mr. Inman pointed out that we need to make a change before we finalize this thing. It's shown as a report to the Ways and Means Committee, but this is the full board. And we'll have to change that when we publish the final drafts. But let's look at the opening resolution and, well, the opening letter here. I'm just going to point out a few pages that might be of interest to you folks. Front page, Grand Traverse County Equalization Department has prepared this equalization report as authorized by the County Board of Commissioners. I recommend that the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners adopt the county equalized values in this report. This report is a result of an equalization study in every class of real property and the total personal property in all 14 assessing units. Once again, that's 66 separate studies. And that's essentially what this, and I also want to emphasize, our recommendations here is that we adopt the assessor's assessments as the county equalized value. We don't have any differences with the local assessors this year. We've had some give and take discussions, but those have all been resolved and people are satisfied with it. Here's the
Mr. Chairman,
resolution.
I move that we adopt the equalization report.
Do
We can
you
still have
want?
discussion.
I understand that. Is it your intention to go through a number of pages in the report?
Just a few pages, but I don't have to do that, but I'd be glad to do it. There's some
Can we
things
hold
that
on
might
that
be of
motion until he
interest.
gets hits a
We
couple
can do the
pages.
motion, he can still do the,
Support.
Oh, sure.
All right. Moved by Commissioner Lemkool, seconded by Commissioner Thomas to support, or to approve the equalization report dated April 10th, 2012, as presented, with the change, the report goes to the Board of Commissioners instead of the Ways and Means Committee. Discussion, continue your presentation.
It's your turn, Bob.
You're good.
Oh, my turn, okay. Hey, we got that all done, all right,
Yeah.
that's great.
We just have a motion on the floor.
Oh, you have a motion on the floor, we're doing this.
To approve.
Okay.
Okay.
Here are the recommended values on this page here, and you'll see this
Okay.
chart in your book. And you'll notice down there in the lower right corner, the decline in taxable is 0.286 of a percentage point, which is much better than most of us expected, by the way. One thing worth noting here is on the page after that, there's a chart that shows the history of the county equalized value since 2002. Of interest to me, and I think to us, you folks who have to plan the fiscal future, this is real property. And, well, this is real and
It's
personal.
real.
But their peak in value is here. There have been some declines, but you'll see it's starting to level off. And that's a better picture. And if that trend continues, cross your fingers, maybe at least we'll stop the decreases. We have virtually no significant decrease this year. We hope to keep it that way in the next year. Once again, the buyers and the sellers in the market will tell us that. Now, here's a chart that shows the breakdown of real property and what percent goes to each class, and that's where your tax base is. Now, that's just for real property. And you'll notice that the thing that always jumps out at me is the residential tax base is 77% of the county total. The people who really pay property taxes in Grand Traverse, and I think virtually every county in the state, are residential taxpayers. Now, the commercial is a large chunk, and so is agricultural, and so is industrial. The next page show the breakdowns, the percent of the county total, and the portion of the pie that goes to each township and city. And that's this page right here. You might want to look at that and see how your townships fare. You might note that well, Traverse City, Garfield, and Peninsula are the three biggest communities in terms of tax base. And Traverse City and Garfield are really within a whisker of each other. Here's the fractional township and city property values. This is based on taxable value now. The other one was county equalized. And just of note that Garfield's actually the largest community in terms of taxable value. Traverse City's within a whisker at number 2. Number 3 is Peninsula Township, and 4 is East Bay. And you just might want to look it over and see. And taxables are the ones people pay taxes on. County equalized, we have to do that, and that's an important part of the process, because ultimately, county equalized becomes taxable. And you'll find in the residential class, for example, better than 80% of the properties, the county equalized is the taxable. Taxable values are starting to catch up with county equalized. And we'll look at those in a minute. The next page has personal property in the pie. It's interesting to take a look at personal property. But one thing we need to kind of keep in the back of our mind when we talk about personal property, I would bet that more than half of that is in fact real property, as I described earlier. And it's important to note that. So the name personal property doesn't necessarily mean it's personal property. Well, for example, at a shopping center, it's not unusual for more than half of the value of the buildings to be in leasehold improvements. When you rent a space in most of the larger shopping centers and a lot of the small ones, what the tenant is renting is a dirt floor, no plumbing, no wiring, no heating, no interior partitioning, no ceiling, And the tenant essentially bears the expense of installing all of the finish, including the concrete floor. And it's just worthwhile to note that our common conception of what is real and what's personal isn't necessarily true every time. And quite often it's not true. And it's helpful to know that when you're thinking of that part of your tax base. Turn to the next page. There's some parcel counts. That's not hugely important. Now here's a page, and take a look at these bar graphs. I'll tell you why those are important to take note of. This is, here, I'll open it up again. See it? You might want, when you get a chance, to look at it. In the residential class, residential declined 1.08% this year in real property. Industrial down 4.5%, commercial declined 6.63%, agricultural down 7.38%. So we're not done with, or at least we aren't this year, with some declines in value on real property and in these classes. Residential is pretty flat. I foresee that this will probably get better over time, but I don't know that. It's certainly better this year than it was last year. And the thing that really saved the county total this year was the fact that personal property is up. Not dramatically, but it's up. Here's a comparison of county equalized value and taxable value by unit. That's sometimes worth taking note of. And as you'll see, taxable value is catching up with county equalized.
Right.
In fact, we're really close in residential. We'll take a look at that. On this next page, it doesn't look very exciting. Right after that last chart, let's do some percentages in here, and I'm going to tell you what's important there. In the residential class, we're down to where the percentage gap between taxable value and state equalized value is 16%. In industrial, it's 14%, and in commercial, it's 15%, in agricultural, it's 61%. As you can see, residential is slowly getting to the point where virtually all the properties, the taxable value and the equalized value are the same number. About 80% of the residential parcels, and I don't have that written down here, probably have a taxable value that's equal to the equalized value. So the proposed rate cap is only affecting a relatively small portion of the residential, and it's tending to reflect a smaller and smaller portion each year. Now, the reason that's important is because taxable value and equalized values don't follow the same growth patterns. Taxable value tends to be more stable. Equalized value tends to be more unstable. You get wider swings up and down. In terms of looking at your future tax base picture, it's worthwhile to just put that in the back of your mind. We are getting to the point where virtually almost all the property, the taxable and equalized, are the same. And that will change the tax base patterns that we see for future years. The next page is the parcel counts of each class of property in each township in the county total. You might note, for what it's worth, the number of parcels of personal property has increased by 14.6%. The number of parcels in real property has increased by 8 thousandths. It's virtually flat. So there are some additional parcels of personal property on the roll. Where they came from, I do not know, and the personal property statements in the hands of local units are confidential. I don't get to see them. Now, I can see them if I ask, but they're confidential by law, and they can only use for property tax administration purposes. Assessors will let me see them if I ask, but they're pretty careful to make sure the confidentiality requirement is not breached. And anyway, that's not an issue, but it's just worthwhile to note, I think, that we've had an increase in the parcel count and personal. What that means, I don't know what to tell you because I don't know what the personal property statements show. You'll note the next pages are all the individual ratios in all the classes and all the assessing units. It's boring to read them, but the key thing is that all the ratios fall between 49 and 50%, which is what's required for us to recommend a one factor for every class and every unit. And they all made it this year. And it's great to see it.
All right.
I'll go past these pages here and I'll go to the end here where these are the totals that you folks are getting ready to adopt today. These are the Form L4024 that we must sign. I must sign it, the clerk of the Board of Commissioners has to sign it, and the chairperson of the Board of Commissioners has to sign it.
Okay.
And those have to be forwarded to the state. And there's no great conflict here. We're all in agreement with the assessing units. I love to see that happen, but it's a lot of work working back and forth with the assessors to get there. And that's the end of my comments.
Okay, we're going to open up the public comment, or commissioner comments. First it was Commissioner Maxbauer and then Commissioner Thomas.
First, Bob, thank you for the large print. My glasses are in the car. I have a question on the tax tribunal appeals. Let us say that a condo owner in a complex goes in front of the tax tribunal and wins. Do all the other units in that complex then, are they then affected in the next year?
No, they're not.
So in effect, I was asked this question, so that's why I'm asking you. So in effect, if someone in a complex that has virtually the same floor plan, et cetera, gets a lower assessment, for the other people in the complex to get a lower assessment, they must also go in front of the tax tribunal?
Well, that's not a rigid rule. Let me comment on that. If I know why the tax tribunal did it, and if I'm the assessor, by the way, I'm only the assessor in one township, but the assessor will look at that and say, okay, what's the reason for the reduction? And does this reason and logic apply equally to all the other condos? And if it does, that assessor should recognize that. Now, you often get tribunal decisions, and I wish it weren't true, where you don't have any idea why the tribunal made the decision they did. In that case, the assessor should go back and look at that unit and look at the other units and say, you should still ask yourself the question, is there something in this unit that was recognized that I need to recognize in the other units? You have to make that decision every year as an assessor, and you want it to be uniform within the complex and within the township for that matter. So that does give a flag to the assessor to analyze the fairness of the assessments in that complex. And if there was a good reason that applies to the others, the assessor should recognize that.
And when a house sells, I was asked this question too, when a house sells and it sells in a neighborhood, well actually I've seen this happen, and actually I saw it happen in East Bay. A house on the water sold, and it sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than it really was taxable value.
Sure.
Okay, so everybody else in the immediate vicinity was in front of the Board of Review saying, hey, my taxes should be lowered too. How much of the assessment is based on sale price?
I just answered that question earlier. You asked, I think it was somewhat the same question, but she had an actual sale. And the sale hadn't even taken place yet, but she knew what she was going to buy it for. And this gentleman, actually, Bert Sherman, something like that. But anyway, I shouldn't mention names. That's not good. But the law says property should be valued based on the usual selling price. The definition of value for assessment purposes under 211.27, if you want a statutory citation, is the usual selling price as opposed to the actual selling price. I've often said to myself many times, what's worse than not having any sales is to have just one.
Right.
Because you don't know how logical that was and whether it's consistent with other similar property. But if a person did purchase it for significantly less than the assessment, they definitely should question it. But the question the Board of Review has to answer, and that the assessor has to answer, is what is typically happening with these properties. And we're not permitted by law to use bank foreclosures,
Short sales.
short sales, those kinds of things. They have to be arm's length transactions with reasonable exposure to the market, usually listed with a real estate company, but not necessarily if they've had full exposure. And you have to, well, I'll give you an example. Years ago, I had two houses sell right next to each other where I was the assessor. Now, this is when market values were low. Exactly the same house, built by the same builder in the same year on the same size lot. Now, market values were way lower then because it was probably 25 years ago. One sold for $59,900, the other sold for $39,900. Now the question arises, what's a fair assessment? And this fair assessment really is what typically happens in that neighborhood for that type of house. The one that was high was too high and you wouldn't assess it at half of that price. And the one that was low, that was probably too low, and I actually did some homework on it. They were listed by the same real estate company. Believe that. They sold within 2 months of each other. So it's a tough question to answer that, and the answer is really what typically happens. And you need to look at all the sales in the general area to determine that. And that's what I did. My assessed value on those, by the way, was somewhat right around the middle of those two. And when I looked at it, that was probably what was happening in that sub, and we had enough sales to figure that out. The one that sold for the high price had a wrought iron eagle over the peak of the garage. It had a flawless lawn. You could have made a putting green out of it. The other one had a weed-infested lawn, and the painting was poor and a lot of other things. So that would have contributed something, but not that kind of difference. It was not logical, not either sale. And that's what you have to do.
Thank you.
Too long a question, but I gave you too long an answer, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Thomas.
I'll give you one you can answer quick. Under personal property tax, you said power poles, you didn't say telephone poles.
Oh, yeah, they are. Oh, no, telephone poles are different.
I was going to say, explain that.
Telephone poles are different, and that's because telephone companies are centrally assessed by the state of Michigan. And the state of Michigan makes an appraisal of all the telephone company property in the state, and they pay a tax on the assessment arrived at by the State Tax Commission, and it's based on the average state tax rate of all units of government in the state of Michigan. I know about that because I used to do that. And so I know a little bit about that. But telephone property is exempt from local taxes, but it pays a state property tax.
Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Richardson.
I noticed for Traverse City, now not just Traverse City, but since that's where I live, that's what I was looking at. The parcel count went down by like 3.5 or 4%, which is like almost 400 parcels.
I asked Deb Chavez about that, and what she said was they did some database cleanup, and they had retired parcels that were still active, and they made them in our databases. You can either have them active, which keeps them included in the parcel count but excluded from the value, and she then made them inactive this year. So it took them out of the parcel count. So it's not that we lost them right now. They've been gradually declining. She just did a database cleanup, pretty much.
So what would cause a parcel to become inactive?
Either if it's retired, if they split it, so if it was, and we have a lot of fractional condos that's happening too right now. And so you would have the main parcel number, and it was split off into 52 weeks, and you would retire that first one. That would make it inactive.
There is a page, and it doesn't look very exciting, but it's like this. It looks like this, about halfway through, And that has, I believe, accurate parcel counts. What you've got there came out of a database that probably, well, Kristen, I think, has explained it. There's probably also some exempt parcels counted in that count that are misleading. But these are the parcel count totals reported to us by the assessors by unit. And I think those are accurate. And when I gave you my parcel count comparisons, I compared them to the parcel counts reported by the assessors by unit in the 2011 report. And I think that was accurate. But that one parcel count, I was going to tell you when I went through it, but that parcel count is close to accurate, but not quite, because there's some things in there that really aren't actually on the assessment roll. The assessors have reported the count that's actually on the roll right here. And that's an accurate number. You're not adopting parcel count numbers, but that's an information item being reported to you folks. It's required to be in the report.
Any other questions of the board members? Okay, hearing none, we have a motion on the floor to approve the equalization the report as presented for dated April 10th, 2012, with the change that is being reported to the Board of Commissioners. Roll call vote, please.
Okay, Commissioner Max Power,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yep.
Richardson,
Yes.
Lemkool,
Yes.
Henschel,
Yes.
Chairman Inman.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. We appreciate the report.
Thank you for holding a special meeting just for us lowly folks.
Welcome to our board rules. Okay.
Thank you.
We will now move on to second public comment. Does any member of the public wish to speak at this time? Do we have several staff members here? Hearing none, we will close second public comment. I have one item after adjournment, which is personal to us on the Flower Fund. So we need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Henschel, seconded by Richardson to adjourn the meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, passes. We are
Great
adjourned.
job, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one item that is not